Hello, can you hear me? Yes, hi. Hi, and welcome. I'm Lynn Jacobson. I'm the managing editor of the Seattle Times, and I want to welcome you here tonight. Last night, the Seattle Times hosted a gubernatorial debate, and tonight we are hosting a distinguished panel of restaurateurs, whom we will introduce to you in just a moment. These are just a couple of ways that the Seattle Times helps you navigate your civic and social life here in the Pacific Northwest, and we thank you for participating. Our moderator tonight is Jackie Varriano. Say hi to Jackie. I probably don't need to make too big of an introduction for Jackie because you've probably seen her eating in your neighborhood. One of Jackie's missions is to sample the food and the food traditions of neighborhoods all over the Seattle area. And so lately you might have seen her eating barbecue in Redmond, or eating shawarma in Renton, or maybe eating flat croissants in Linwood. She really gets around, and we are very proud.
In a good way.
In a good way, she says. So we're very proud to say that Jackie, along with her colleagues, Ton Vin and Bethany Jean Clement, who are also here tonight, they have built the most comprehensive, the most authoritative, the most entertaining food coverage in the Pacific Northwest. And we thank you for supporting that coverage by reading the Seattle Times, by subscribing, and by signing up for our food and drink newsletter, which you can do at seattletimes.com. Thank you very much. So with that, I will hand it over to Jackie to make introductions. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm kind of in the middle, so just remember that I'm not a restaurant owner. It will be easy to remember that. Rachel Yang is right to my left. And then to my right, I have Kristi Brown. And Victor Steinbrueck. And Ethan Stowell. Okay, so we're all here because we love food and we love eating. I have a little nervousness, so I'm not that emotional yet. And we're worried about how our money is going, where it's going. I think as we are all aware, especially for the other industry people that are in the audience, in December, Seattle's minimum wage is going to jump to nearly $20 for all businesses. And right now, the city's tip credit will expire simultaneously, meaning businesses that credit tips toward wages must raise the pay floors. So there's been a lot of debate in city council, there's been a lot of debate online, and what we kind of want to know, I think, first of all, is what are the misconceptions around this rise in minimum wage from your perspectives? Who wants to talk first?
Well, can I start with just some general misconceptions?
Yeah.
So I think that people have this idea that as restaurateurs, because we buy in bulk, we get this great price, right? And then we mark it up accordingly, to the costs and the things that it takes to run a business. And it's just not true. It literally is not true. If not, sometimes maybe close to equal to what you're paying in the grocery store. And so then you think about the ideal of all the things that it takes, to get it from the place that we buy it from to your table. It's such a huge difference, and I find a lot of times that people have a more relaxed ideal about how this all transpires, and then questions the cost of how we cost of us doing business. And so I just think that's really important to understand. Like, one of the things for us is that we source from a lot of small vendors. So a lot of small vendors don't have delivery. So that means I have to hire someone to go pick up the food from the South End, because I'm representing the South End in my food, and that's this conversation that I'm having. So there's a lot of little extra costs that people don't understand that we go through to get the food on the table, especially for smaller businesses, and I think that's super important to understand.
That's a great one. Anybody else? Rachel?
Yeah, because I think we talked about the misconception, because I think there's that a lot of the individual cost that goes into putting up food on the table for a restaurant as well. I know that a lot of people think that, when you go to the grocery store, I can see this, like, a steak is, $12. Why is that restaurant is $60? I think that, it used to be this is like literally back in the days. I think when I went to open my first restaurant, I went to talk to, I spent my time doing a business proposal to show it to my SBA counselor. And then, the first thing that you hear about is like, okay, it's like 30% labor cost, 30% food cost, 30% operating cost, and there's your 10% profit. However, fast forward, it's been about 17 years since then, and things have changed quite a bit. With everything has gone up as much as it has, because what we're feeling, and this is where everyone here is feeling, because we're all on the same page. Like, what you guys are paying extra insurance, we're paying extra insurance. If you guys are paying extra health, our health benefit has, the price has gone up. Utilities, we just got our walk-in, someone to come and take a look at, I'm paying $250 an hour, plus a truck fee, plus the products they're using. Every single thing costs money, right? So that X amount of dollars, right now these days, I think the more of true number, everyone number is a little bit different. But because of we're talking about the labor cost and everything, it has become the most dominant percentage of your operation. And I think that's where it dictates so much of your cost, because we're talking about the much larger sum than what it used to be. And then any kind of change is going to be reflected in the price later. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So some people say that you've had 10 years to adjust to this huge rise for the tip credit to expire. But inflation is not new. Rising costs are not new. Why is the wage jump feel so big now? Like, why does it feel like such a panic right now? Ethan, you want to take that?
Sure, and I'm going to go back a little bit to the previous question, and I'll get to that in a second. So, I think it's important to also recognize, first off, this minimum wage thing is only part of this conversation, and I think it's also important to know that ESR as a company is actually for it. We like it. We like the idea of it. We like about bumping it up. I think it's really important to understand why costs cost more. There's definitely the breakdowns. There's a whole bunch of things that have gone into the last 10, 20 years of restaurants. This is my 21st year of owning restaurants, and it's definitely more complex than it was 20 years ago. It's just harder, it's more expensive, insurances are more expensive, rent's more expensive, triple nets is more expensive, your business insurance is more expensive, your employees' health care is more expensive. In fact, things that have changed, I think personally, the industry's changed for a lot of good things, a lot of things that we take for granted, right? So when I first started in the restaurant industry, there was no need to provide insurance, and I want to be very clear. I'm not talking about ESR. I'm talking about the restaurant industry in general. That's how my perspective is going to be on this whole night. It's not going to be about ESR. It's going to be about the restaurant industry as a whole, from the perspective of in generalities from previous times to now. So there was no vacation pay. Oftentimes there was no overtime pay. There was a lot of free labor with internships. There is a lot there was no paternity leave, maternity leave. There was none of all these things that we enjoy. There's no sick safe time. There was no PTO. All of these things have been changes, I think, for the best. They're great. right? I think it's great for somebody who has a kid to be able to go out and spend 3-6 months with their newborn. I think it's really important. You know, it just wasn't a thing in the restaurant industry 20 years ago. Nobody was talking about it. Nobody had it. So I think it's important to understand that those are all added benefits that somebody has to pay for, right? So it's not, ultimately, a business to be successful has to turn some level of profit. Everybody can debate whether it's 2%, 10%, 20%, doesn't matter. But in order to keep the lights on, they have to make some sort of a profit. So as we've added all these great things, somebody has to pay for them. And unfortunately, we have to pass it on to our customers in some regard, right? You know, it's the same thing with this new minimum wage. We as a community have decided that we feel like there's an ethical responsibility to raise our minimum wage to the highest in the nation. We want to lead by example. And I'm all for the raise. I agree with the mission. But I think it's important for people to understand, if we are going to have that mission, which I'm for, we're going to have, simply put, we're going to have the most expensive restaurants in the country. That's just how that math works out. Servers work on minimum wage plus tips. That's how the model's always been. Bartenders are the same. Hosts the same. Bussers the same. Cooks in some fashion have been part of that as well. So if we did this as a community, we elected officials that made decisions for us as a group, and the decision was that we were going to raise our minimum wage and not have a tip credit, because we don't believe in a tip credit. As a community, we're going to make ourselves the highest minimum wage in the country, and that's going to have us having to pay the highest restaurant prices in the country. And from my perspective, I think it's great. I think it's a really good thing. But I think where there's this there's a disconnect happening right now where people are not saying, hey, we've chosen this as a community and we have to accept that it costs more. Maybe we should have gone to a vote. Maybe it should have gone to a vote so people had a little bit more buy-in. But that's what we decided as a community through our elected officials. Does that make sense for everybody? So.
I'll add in one little bit. I think to Ethan's point, you know, the way I look at restaurants is we're doing our part as restaurant owners, as employees of the restaurant, but there's also a part of it where, you know, we only exist with our customers and guests that come in, and the service that we're offering is kind of a community hub. And I think to Ethan's point about what was I trying to say here? It being everyone's kind of it's everyone's responsibility to partake in what we have chosen through legislation and the people that we've put into office. So it's as much as we take responsibility to ensure that our employees get paid and are supported properly, that they get paid a living wage. The understanding for customers to also realize the same thing, that they're a big part of keeping us in business to be able to do so.
Okay, so employees are also our community members, right? So employees are ones who are probably eating at all of these other restaurants as well. They're participating in community things as well as being employees of your restaurant. Are your employees saying anything, or how do they feel about rising costs, rising minimum wage from like an employee's perspective? Is there something that's talked about a lot?
I think not to cut you off, yeah. I think the big thing for my employees personally is, you know, they want healthcare. Yeah. And I want to be able to give that to them. But with all the costs that it also takes to run a small business, you know, especially as a single shop, it's difficult. We're moving towards that, but it's a big hit on the business to be able to, you know, our want is to make our employees happy. You know, it helps with the sustainability of the longevity of our restaurant. You know, I signed a lease for 10 years. I want to be around for 10 years at least. And that requires taking care of employees in a way that makes them feel heard and seen, and just listening to them. I know for my employees, it's a close-knit, I don't want to use the word family, but you know, it feels like that sometimes.
No, I don't think anybody.
I know that's a buzzword. I know, but it feels like that some ways, you know. And so it's a community. There we go. And And part of that is like having a relationship with every single one of them as a small business, a single restaurant, and taking into account whatever their needs are on any given day.
Did you want to? No. Okay.
I mean, I'll add into it. I mean, let's be honest. All of us right now are feeling pinched, right? You have inflation that's high that is a across the board factor for pretty much anything. You've got interest rates that are really high, which really erodes consumer confidence and their willingness to go out and spend, right? So restaurants on national level are this year so far are down about 10 to 15% annually. So you have restaurant sales year over year going down, costs going up, and it's just a tough scenario for your community neighborhood restaurants. It just is. I mean, it's not like it won't come back, but we're actually in a low point right now, and some people don't really get it, right? Like, oh, you need to lower your prices. It's really hard to do that right now because customer counts are actually down, and it's partly because it's so expensive. But the community restaurants didn't cause the price increases, right? They just have to factor in what the current cost is, and we hope some of those costs will go down. And I think next year will be a much better year for all businesses. I hope, particularly if the election goes how we want with that ass-kicking debate you did last night. But my point is that it's a tough time for restaurants. I mean, we're in and then you have a city like Seattle that has crazy high cost of living, and it's just kind of the perfect storm that everybody's got going on right now. But it's a moment in time. It will pass. The consumer confidence will go back up. Interest rates will go down, and people will feel like they have more cash to go out and spend, and will get adjusted to these new prices. But it's a big spike right now.
So when we talk about prices, I think we're mostly talking about menu prices. Is there like a direct correlation between your costs and menu prices? Like what goes into what things cost on a menu?
I mean, I think that's
1 hour. Brevity is your friend.
no. If anyone's price is not reflecting on their cost, that will be something that's probably definitely not right. I mean, I think that's basically, isn't this like Econ 101, like your price is all reflecting your cost, right? And I think this is what we're talking about, the fact that your cost is just rising and there's absolutely no other way but the price to rise. The thing is that when we talk about, the topic of this is like, why are restaurants so expensive, right? So because price has basically feelings. It's expensive or it's cheap. We're all feeling expensive, and that is actually and I like to use, the reason why I use the word feeling is that we have all sort of, we all have, an individual has a different basically idea of what is a good amount of cost, a price they are willing to pay. And then if it is more than that, and we're all feeling expensive. Or if you basically have to divide your pie into smaller pieces and you don't have as much to allocate to that, we feel expensive. So expensive is happening sometimes not because of us, because of like when everyone is basically pinched and when they have a smaller pie piece to go into the restaurant budget, it's expensive, 100%. I feel the same way. The absolute dollar is expensive, yes, because of the Seattle, as we all know, has the highest inflation in the country. The price has gone up. I was looking at actually after talking about this, looking at my very first menu when we opened the restaurant, like 2007. Our appetizers were like $8 to $10, and our entrees were like $18 to $20, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But it actually is they talk about the inflation for about like 10 years. It has gone up about 50%. And right now our appetizers are on basically like 12 to 14 to 15, and then still it's relatively, we try really hard to find a way for people to not feel expensive, because it's the feeling of expensive, and and the reason why we are having this conversation is that we understand that the cost is rising. So how do we make sure that people get the value when they go out to eat, so they don't feel so expensive, because we all want to support our community. We all want to basically make sure that every single person who works at the restaurant or any other places get their, minimum wage plus more, because we are talking about minimum wage, and we all of us talked quite a bit about actually a lot of people in working in a restaurant make more than minimum wage. But however, minimum wage is still much, much lower than living wage here in Seattle. And when we're talking about when you're talking about this, when you feel expensive, that means, still that we're all of us, people are being squeezed every day economically. And we, as a restaurateurs, we all of us got here. I don't know if you can notice, we're all actually chef restaurateurs. So I like to actually say that means we all got into this industry because we love to cook. We love food. We didn't get here so that we can make money. And every single day, the reason why we are here was because we wanted to make our food accessible. Just like what Victor said, without any of our customers, without people coming into our restaurant, tasting our food, it doesn't mean anything. We love people to come in so that the restaurant is busy, everyone's making money, but more than anything, what we want is people come into our restaurant and having the moment, celebrating their birthdays, enjoying their anniversaries, having this moment that we all have in our memories about going out to a restaurant and what it means to people. And we want to be accessible, and that's why we're struggling and trying to have this conversation. When the cost is rising, how can we keep the restaurant accessible as much as possible?
I think it's interesting, just a tag on to what you're saying, because the thing is like, although inflation has grown so much, even though your prices were $8, I venture to say that $8 thing is maybe like $12 now, maybe. But you have to it's such a push to do that when that reflects the actual cost, but this perceived idea is that you come to us to be comforted. You through the food, through the atmosphere, through the entertainment, whatever that means inside each restaurant. And then when we're actually trying to balance that thing out, we get persecuted for trying to actually reflect the cost that it is. And so that's a really, that is a very challenging place to be in as a small restaurateur, just trying to figure out how to make that balance. And so actually, Ethan is the one that helped me understand more about the different things, that how we have to play tricks. It's such a crazy thing. So there's this thing I'm spending all this time with this one particular dish, but I can't charge as much. So I find something else that's cheaper and try to raise the price on that to kind of level the things out so that I can provide you with all of this space that you want when you come to eat with us. And so it's just such a dance. It's nothing simple about it, and I think that it's been fascinating for me as a caterer to transition into restaurants, to see people's perceived value change so drastically. This idea is, and we spoke about this on the phone just a little bit about also the perceived value of if you're not if you are a restaurant of color, and the ideal that, okay, well, I didn't pay when my mama, when my auntie that had the restaurant paid this much, I didn't have to pay this much. How is it that your food is that much more? And we're dealing with people's emotions around their food, emotions around the history of their eating. It's just so much that we have to take into consideration. And I think that question about the misconceptions honestly could take the whole show, because there's just so many interesting things that we have to entertain when we're thinking about how we're pricing things out. It's not just merely the labor, all the different things. It's also this emotional attachment to food that we're also having to put a value on for folks.
Yeah, and value is a hot button word. I also think profit can kind of sometimes feel like a dirty word in the restaurant industry. How much profit are you making? Do restaurant owners deserve to make a profit, or how much profit they should make?
Oh, it's real. I had somebody accuse us of stealing their tips from them. And I was like, that's a very interesting thing. It's or because we're over here getting paid. We're over here getting paid. And it's man, it's such an interesting thing to have this love. It's a very, like going in opposite directions. Like you love the food, but you get persecuted for it because you do. There is this ideal that you're like, you should be doing this altruistically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, hey, I mean, you laugh, right? But think about it. How many, like, at some point, I've just had to say, we have met our donation quota for the year. Because your value around food is around your emotions. So you're not thinking about how much it costs me. You're thinking about the cause. You're tied to this emotion. This is my kid's school. They need to raise money. Can you donate this food? You know, okay. You know, like, it's like, how, you know, how do we balance all of that out? Which is an interesting question that I don't think a lot of people that patronize businesses think about. Food businesses particularly think about, because there's a lot of asked of us that has nothing to do with the day-to-day service.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in on a little bit of the costs, right? So what I've been telling people a lot lately is when they go and when anybody says it's so expensive, you know, I literally I tell people, like, if you're against paying higher prices, you're against paying people more of a living wage. Because in a restaurant, right? You know, so we have all of these things, and I know it's everybody has this idea that restaurants is simple. We go get something and put it on a plate. That's what it is, right? And like, how hard is it to make a burger? It's not the whole idea where people used to go and they go to the grocery store and say, oh, I can buy a pork chop for $6 or $5 now, and why are they charging me $42? It has nothing to do with the cost of the product anymore. You know, it is the cost of the labor to have somebody make it for you. That is what's changed dramatically. So if you're looking at a restaurant, you know, we have employees, and we talked about earlier, and I always make sure I say this. I'm all for all this. But because now we also having vacation time, PTO, insurance, sick days, and maternity leave, paternity leave, all of these things, right? You know, it is a much bigger number than it used to be. And it's all something that is all positive. That's the thing people have to get their brain wrapped around. It's positive. It's all good change. And it's all things that people should have. But when you're talking about a restaurant, there's their labor, there's all their insurance, there's all their stuff and all the benefits you give them, and it's the total compensation package. Plus there's the employee taxes and all of the stuff. I mean, 40 to 50% of a restaurant's revenue is all in the labor. So if people are going out and saying, "Hey, this pork chop's $6 at the grocery store," take your entree cost, cut it in half, and see if you think it's still a ripoff, because half of it nowadays is labor. The game's totally changed, and we have to get our brain wrapped around just the mentality that we're now supporting individuals now through it. I mean, more than ever before. We have chosen to have the highest minimum wage in the country, which I agree with 100%. We should be, and this city should be the beacon of hope for how we handle things. It's a great message for us to send, but there's people have to get on board with it too. So
we all want the same thing, but I think as restaurant owners, we are the ones that are left to kind of pick up the pieces to figure it out. And I think that's something to recognize as customers, is that we are really doing our best. We got into it, to Rachel's point, that we're all chef-driven restaurants. We got into it because I got into it because I like to cook food for people, and I love the feeling of being able to share that with others. Learning about how to run a business is a totally different ballgame, and it's something that takes. I get to be up here with these guys and listen to how they view it and run their businesses, and it's super helpful to me to be able to understand a little bit more about what it really takes. But at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, which is to give our employees a livable wage, give them health care. They deserve everything. They work so hard. I know just
give our customers great value.
And give our customers great value, 100%. It's so funny to think about how much customers live in our heads. I think oftentimes am I right? Where we put something forth, we come up with a new menu item, and we put that on the menu. It could be one customer that says, we don't like this. That might come off the menu the next day. based off one customer. We think so much
Like
about you.
once a month, I get on Victor's Yelp, create a fake account, and say something like that. I just like
the
messing
one.
with the new guys.
And it works.
That's good to know how much power we have. No, we don't need any more power. We don't need it.
No, you don't.
Okay, so if labor really is the biggest cost, and then all the other costs are the normal ones that we're thinking of, if we're looking at this slide up here that Kristi provided with us about her expenses, just that net profit at the bottom, that 8%, like what does it take to even get that? What does it take to make a profit at a restaurant?
I will answer this because we just went through this, as Ethan knows, earlier this year. We had to lay off a whole bunch of people.
Oh.
We had to lay off a whole bunch of people because the thing with us is that we started in the pandemic and people don't understand, like, they're like, oh, you're so brave. And it was like, no, we were in process of building. We just had to open. So it wasn't about being brave. It was just about like doing the next step, indicated step in front of us. And so when we started hiring people, we had to pay way above the minimum wage because Google kitchens and the big kitchens were still running and paying people with no experience $25 an hour and up. So we couldn't lowball people. We didn't have a choice. It was like, sure, I want to pay you a living wage, want to live too. So like, how do we do this? But we couldn't really figure that out. And so once we got into like a couple of years in and it was kind of eased up a little bit, we realized, oh wow, we are overpaying people more than the business can handle. So we had to lay people off. Yeah.
Does anybody else want to talk about profits?
I mean, I'll mention one. I think it's one of the things. I think there's the conversations about, is one restaurant enough? I know that's a topic. And then there's also like, what's the profit margin to do? The thing about restaurants right now is that there's no room for error anymore, right? So, Kristi talks about laying people off, and I've talked to her a little bit about her business, and that's the correct thing for her to do for the health of the business, right? I mean, it's not a fun thing to say, it's not a fun thing to do, but the business has to be sustainable. We are also, you have now, we've been having the conversation about the DoorDash delivery stuff. The thing about, and I know also in here, I'd like to get to the topic of, what can the city do to assist? Because the city hasn't really done anything to help support small businesses. I will say that. But, there's no room for error, and there's a lot of people I see here that have very little room for error. You have your house guaranteed, you've got a personal loan, you've got your, you have a personal guarantee on your lease. All of these things, that are very stressful, and these people that are in this industry really are passionate about making people happy. We have a couple of restaurants this year. This year's been a tough year. There's one I'm thinking about. We're really considering closing, and I'll actually mention it. We have a company down on Leary Way. Now, this is part of the thing about the city being involved. Leary Way, if those that don't know, it's in the area called Freeloud. We're thinking about moving that restaurant out of that neighborhood. We have our lease is up. The pizza place, Freeloud Pizza Company. So we're thinking about moving the restaurant, and the reason we're thinking about doing it is because, one, we rely heavily on DoorDash delivery orders. City hasn't gotten things figured out with DoorDash and how they're going to handle those things. Whatever their answer is, they just need to make whatever the decision is happen so people know what a new norm is. Right now there's a back and forth, so everybody's avoiding DoorDash. But the problem is there's a bunch of small businesses that are suffering from inaction. And our sales are down 20% because DoorDash is down 20%, 30%. And then also it's the whole thing about the environment of the business. That neighborhood's not safe. It's not safe. As much as I love the Burke Gilman and I love riding my bike on it, there's tons of drugs in that neighborhood. We need to have that be cleaned up. And it's not that I'm not sympathetic and want to be part of the solution, But we've been held up by knife. We've been held up by gun. We've had employees, chased to their cars. I mean, and that place has probably been broken into in the last 4 years since all of this street crime has been a problem. It's probably been broken into 40, 50 times. Whether it's just a rock thrown through the window, honestly, we can't afford it. And honestly, it's not that I'm not sympathetic. It's not worth it. It's not worth it because it's so much effort that goes into that one place for diminishing returns. And so we're probably going to end up moving that restaurant and just making that hard decision because there's just not a room to. I have the choices. Do I want to sign another 5-year lease, 10-year lease, 2-year lease? We lost money this year. Should we? Would anybody else do that? I don't think so. So you just got to keep in mind that there's a lot going on in the restaurant industry right now.
I wasn't really prepared to talk about crime tonight.
Sorry.
Just going to be honest. I'm not the City Hall reporter. So we're going to do a hard right turn. A little bit. To another favorite topic. I can see that Meg Van Huygen really likes that comment. I will heckle from the stage. Okay, well then let's talk about service fees, tipping, surcharges, because it's one way that restaurant owners can recoup costs, can spread the money further, I think. And I think a lot of people, when we talk about service fees and surcharges, the pushback, especially comments that we got on this story that ran, there were over 700 comments on this story, and a lot of them said, why don't you just raise prices? Which I think we have talked about tonight is just not the answer. So why not just raise, why do a service charge or surcharges? Ethan has a lot to say about this, I know, but Rachel, how do you feel about how do you feel about tipping or surcharges and service charges?
Well, it's actually funny because, obviously I came from the country where there's no service charge, there's tipping. And so I've been here for a long time, but it is something still that is, because you hear from a lot of people. Like people who are in the U.S., it is part of sort of a good and bad, something that you just kind of live with. This is how it is. This is how we do things here. And everyone's like, okay, when you go to Europe, when you go to here, there's no, anything. The system, obviously is very tricky, very tough. The whole idea basically is that, when it's having it to be inclusive in price, which is 100%. But then the reason why US is so different is that if we always talk about this, US has the, one of the higher, CPIs and the wages then compared to other countries. And then the support system that you have from just the cost of living is really high, right? So we are talking about this price without that is not tip included. And then we're talking about already people talking about they're expensive. So, again, and this is with 100% still the same basically a principle that our price reflects the cost. So we're talking about basically let's get rid of tipping, and then for either you are telling basically especially basically here in Washington, this tip. Everyone knows. I don't know if everyone knows the history of tipping, because I'm sure your article talked about it. It talked about because the system was there because when it used to be a minimum wage was $2. And so we're talking about basically a system with a $20 minimum wage. And of course, everyone is, does not understand how the logic works. However, we're also being in the city where our service industry folks are making a decent wage, because we want these folks to also be able to not travel 40 minutes to come and work here. We want to have a lot of people who are able to live in the community and then be able to work. And so we're talking about the same thing, you're talking about the same median wage, median incomes and all that stuff. So so we are trying to basically figure out a way to get these folks to be that closer to median wage that all Seattleites who can live in Seattle can have. So that the disparity is quite large. So I think that's the biggest thing, that when you're talking about, it doesn't make sense that when you're talking about it's already expensive, and then let's talk about tipping, because then what are we talking about?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, Victor, as a counter serve restaurant, you're kind of like that outlier on this.
Yeah, it's kind of a tricky conversation for me because you are right. We are counter service, so we do get to see a lot of customers come through. And tips has been a really good thing for us in a lot of ways. We pay above minimum wage, and we have a pooled tip system where everyone from my dishwasher to my cooks to my front of house all get even distribution. And because of the high volume of people that come through the restaurant, which, you know, we're blessed to have, and not every restaurant gets to see that high volume. So, you know, it works for me really well, but, you know, if we talk about Ethan's, all of his restaurants, I could see it being a really useful tool to go to no tipping, you know, where across the board, employees are getting paid well above minimum wage, and the rest is, you know, mathematically it makes more sense, which makes his life so much easier, right? But yeah, for myself, you know, tipping has been a good thing.
Yeah. He says nervously.
But also, like, you know, I'm 4 years into this game of owning a restaurant, and tipping is all I know.
Yeah.
And so take that into account as well, where it's just made sense for us. And same as Kristi, you know, we opened during COVID. And we weren't seeing numbers of people come into our restaurant. It was, you know, myself, and a few other people working. And now that there are people coming in, tips just make sense.
Yeah.
So I guess to like wrap that up, it's you know,
did.
it's hard to wrap every restaurant into the same genre.
Yeah,
Because I'm a
it's not a
counter service
monolith.
restaurant. You know, very different than sit down restaurant where you have full servers and taking your order at your table.
Yeah, which also I think makes the minimum wage conversation difficult as well, because not every restaurant is the same. Not every coffee shop, every bar. There's just not one. Even like at ESR, you've got bagel shops, you've got sit-down restaurants, or Rachel has a cake shop and sit-down restaurants. Catering is very different. I mean, yeah. So you can see why there is so much misinformation and disconnect. So then, okay, Ethan, are you the only one up here with a service charge?
We're the one with the service charge. I think if you're.
Oh, you do have a service charge.
Oh, you do. Okay. You want to chat first?
Oh, I mean, we use our service charge to like help us with balancing out the labor piece, like especially for like with us, ours helps with our kitchens, because it's shared tips, but it's on a tier and it's all kind of. I'm not the
No,
math
but
person.
it's a complicated thing.
It is. It's super complicated, and everyone has their own formula about how they do things. But we use our service charge to balance out the costs, particularly for the back of the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think if you're talking about tips and service charge and all that stuff, I think it's important to really go back and see. Because I think all restaurants suffer from the fact that it's been a system that's been in place and is the norm for our customers, and that's a burden on us to change it. It's really hard. We have customers that love tipping. We've got customers that hate tipping. We've got customers that hate service charge and customers that love service charge, and everything in between. You know, so we kind of and also there's also do the same thing with the employees. Some of them love it. Some of them hate it. Some of them want more of it. Some of them don't. But so the history of tipping, right? It was how it's always started. How it started. I'm not going to go into the history of, you know, of racism and sexism and all stuff. I'm going to talk about like how it's usually been done is server takes your order. It used to be that servers did a lot of table side things at fancy restaurants, so they got the tip. Make bananas flambe, steak Diane, all kinds of stuff. Going out to dinner was like a show. And the servers were the one that usually did that show. So therefore, the servers were the ones that were like the taking care of the customer from really start to finish. So the tips went to them. That's just how it was. And it stayed that way for a long time. Now, what it usually was with the restaurant industry was servers got paid less because they made a bunch more money in tips. And then the restaurant would take care of the kitchen crew and pay them an hourly rate that made sense. Now, as time goes on, and I'm like I said, I don't have a dog in this fight, so I'm just explaining it. This is not an opinion piece. As the minimum wage goes up, right? So here you are in the years now, we're in 2024, the minimum wage is about to go up for all employers $3.50 an hour. So it's going to be about $21.50 next year. So what happens is, as the years go by, servers' minimum wage goes up, and they're actually catching up to the cooks, right? So, you know, if a server's making $20 an hour and a cook's making 25, if all the tips go to that server's probably making 45 or 50, right? So could be 60, could be 70, depending on where they work. So the issue, how tip credits have come in, if they said some states believe in tip credits, they say, okay, we're going to pay the server because they make tips less money per hour, right? So like in Idaho, we have a restaurant there. Our servers, and it's every restaurant does it, so it's not, I don't feel bad saying it. Every server in the city of Boise gets paid $3.50 an hour. And then they make about $30 to $40 an hour in tips because they take all of their tips. When the minimum wage is higher, and there's not a thing called a tip credit, I'm not arguing for it or against it, I promise you this. What has happened over the years is that there's been a tip split between the front of house and the back of the house. So some people like Victor, or it doesn't matter what position you work in, or what side of the house, the front of the house or back of the house, everybody shares in tips equally. Some have it's 80-20, where 80% goes to servers and 20% goes to the back of the house. Some have it be 50-50, 60-40, 70-30, you name it. Everybody has different variations. And it's all a total huge pain. I'll tell you right now, all restaurant owners that take tips don't like tips. At least that's my experience. So when the minimum wage jumps so high, there's a couple of things that happen. One, the minimum wage goes up to 21, let's say it's $21.50 next year. So who's getting the raise in that? It's the server that's still making the $25 an hour in tips. So they get a $3.50 an hour wage. You have to raise prices to accommodate. And at the same time as you're raising prices for your customers, are you giving a raise to the cooks that are making 25? Because you're going to have to raise your prices even higher. So it puts it at a disadvantage. So like, well, I'm giving the server the raise that's making, in actual practice, is making $50 an hour or so. And the cook that's making 25, who has, $60,000 in student loan debt because you go to culinary school, I have a hard time justifying giving him a raise. And then if you do give both of them a raise, and you give the server a raise, $3.50 an hour, so you got to raise prices to accommodate. When the tip goes up, so your salmon was 30, now it's 40, who gets the majority of that 20%? The server. So every time the minimum wage goes up, servers get essentially a double raise. I don't have a dog in this fight, so I'm not saying it's good or bad, but that's what goes on in all of restaurants' heads, where they're trying to figure out how to make it even. Because there's always been a fight between the front of the house and the back of the house. There's always been a battle, right? So the thing that all restaurant owners, particularly chef-owned restaurants and independent operators who have a very personal connection to the business and their employees, they just want things to be fair. So that's one of the things that's been a big hindrance on the tips thing. So what we did the $3.50 an hour minimum wage increase last year because we're over 500 employees. We said this is going to be too much of a burden on our customers because, hey, we're going to go up $3.50 an hour. Means we have to raise our prices a bunch to accommodate that, and then their tip's going to go up on top of that because their check average is going to be higher, which means their tip's going to be higher. So we didn't necessarily feel comfortable with raising our prices 20, 30, 35%. So what we did was we gave everybody the dollar amount of the increase, but we switched it to service charge. So now instead of people getting tips, everybody's just an hourly rate. Everybody's an hourly rate. So our service charge money goes into our general fund dollars, and everybody gets an hourly rate. Like, hey, this is what it is. I've always hated tips. I don't think people should get a raise because salmon goes up. I think servers that that have tenure and experience and are excellent and committed to the company should get a raise instead of the price of beer going up. So we did that, and we've been happy with it. It's a very expensive switchover, but that's what the service charge change is people are talking about in most cases. I know it's super complicated, and it's nothing I wanted to ever understand, but it's a very tricky thing, and that's how people are thinking about service charges. It's kind of stabilize the wages, so now you get them an hourly rate, which is really good for them because most restaurants, when you have a vacation pay, they get paid their vacation on minimum wage. If you give them an hourly rate that is the inclusion of minimum wage plus hourly rate, then they get vacation at their true wage that they make. So they don't take a pay cut to call in sick. They don't take a pay cut to take a vacation. They can actually use their vacation hours at that true rate they make. And I'm sure there's a lot of questions about that. So you're welcome. I just confused the hell out of you. If you need more help, let me know.
No, I think you did a good job underscoring why people are making that choice and just how different it is. When I used to work in restaurants, we didn't have vacation. We didn't have healthcare. My first serving job was in North Dakota, and my hourly rate was $119. I think I got a raise to $217 by the time I was in college, but still. But it's also just a part of change in Seattle, I think, and how everything has changed for a multitude of reasons. And a lot of that is cost because that's what we're talking about. But I'm wondering what it would have taken if you were to open Revel today, how much it would have cost versus when you first opened that restaurant.
Oh, wow.
If you even know, if you can even.
I mean, because we actually, so the really good comparison is that we opened Revel, I guess the original Revel 13 years ago, and then we just opened a cake shop. And then so the cake shop is basically has no kitchen because it's retail space. It's 300 square feet, and Revel originally was probably close to 1,500, and there was some storage space in the basement. Still, the cake shop costed more.
Really? The cake shop?
Absolutely.
With no kitchen.
With no kitchen.
And a minuscule footprint.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's in.
You guys seem surprised.
We just kind of forget.
I think that's hilarious because I feel like I remember, I saw something, I was looking up this before we got here, and I saw that it was maybe it could cost somewhere between $30,000 and $250,000 to open up a restaurant. And I was like, okay, that's when you already have the restaurant. It's already there. It's I think our HVAC costs $150,000. The costs are ridiculous. And again, we opened up in a pandemic. So the cost was rising as we were building. We would do something and be like, hurry up. You got to hurry up and pay for this right quick because it's about to go up. And then we missed a deadline and it was ×2. And it was just amazing. So I know for sure, that's not surprising to me at all because it's just the cost of, it's not just the cost of the space. It's the cost of all the licenses. I thought that was interesting hearing you say that in some states, they don't have some of those licensing costs. Because again, when we talk about the city and about what do they do to help us balance this whole thing out. Because it's okay, we just can't keep stacking on the prices. And then it's not only, it's the food, it's the build out, it's the equipment, it's the repair, it's the gentle repairs. It's this ain't gonna last but 3 years anyway. You just opened 4 years ago. It's already breaking down already. It's all of those kind of costs that are never accounted for. It's just you just gonna the cost of doing business. But it's just amazing to me how much the prices have gone. I remember when we were building, there was one company in the city that makes elevators. One city, right? So then construction got paused because they couldn't get some of the equipment to us because there was another. It's like that's how small this situation is, and we end up paying that cost for that. So it's just like, and that's how it is for a lot of these things. Like, there's only so many HVAC guys, there's only so many plumbers that do non-constructive plumbing. It's just always these things that you have to consider. So those prices are raising for them. It's going to raise for us. Yeah.
I'm in kind of in a funny position right now where I'm toying around with the idea of opening a commissary kitchen. And I found a space that's about 3,000 square feet. The initial bid on that space, with architectural fees, the HVAC system, everything was $1.2 million. And I'm not looking for a retail space. I'm looking for a kitchen, with just the equipment in there. I think the hood itself, the system itself, with the venting and everything, was almost $400,000.
Down to Soto. Water's warm down there.
Yeah, there we go.
I got a
And so,
kitchen space.
what a how I got some. Okay, well, we'll talk after this. But that's a huge fear, right? Just to open something up and knowing that you're, one, especially in a commissary kitchen space where you're not making money in that space unless you're doing catering or something. But to pay that all back as a restaurant where we're talking about raising prices and getting kickback, it's a huge fear to grow a business. When at the end of the day, I think for me, part of the reason for wanting to grow a business is to create more opportunity for the people that stick by me, that have been working so hard, to be able to offer them more opportunity than just a line cook position, just a front house position. And so it's the long game too. We're not just thinking about the day to day. We're thinking about how do we stay in business, which requires us to take care of our employees 10 years down the road.
As far as costs go, I mean, I can tell you now there's a few things I want to clarify. There's some misconceptions about restaurant pricing, right? As far as cost of going to build it. So there's oftentimes you talk to a landlord that wants a restaurant in their building. So they're willing to cover some of the costs of that, right? Sometimes it's a lot of it, sometimes it's a little bit of it. And it's really about whether you really, think the business is sustainable to cover the amount that you're going to end up having to pay. So, it's called TI allowances, tenant improvement allowances, right? So, but I would say first restaurant I opened in 2003. Now, this is totally generalized averages. We had a 3,500 square foot space. We spent, it was an outrageous amount of money. We thought at the time was $450,000 getting the doors open. That means inventory, that means training, that means wine, booze, permits, painting, redecorating, new equipment, everything. And so 3,500 square feet, $450,000, you're talking about $130 a foot or whatever it is, $130 per foot. We don't budget anything for less than $600 to $800 a foot now. So put it in perspective, that now I'm not saying that we pay $600 to $800 a square foot. Landlords participate, but that's part of the equation that you have to look at, whether you can do a restaurant or not. Are the landlords participating? Because how profit is calculated on a restaurant, right? So, say you open a restaurant and you do $1 million, just for round number sake, you do $1 million in sales, and you profit 20%. Sounds pretty great, right? $20,000. $200,000, $18,000 a month. Now, that dollar amount, that $18,000 a month, that $200,000 is what goes to paying the debt, the cost of the build out, right? So people assume that hey, it's busy restaurant, you're printing money. Now, profit of a restaurant, whether it's 2%, 5%, 20%, has that money, you have to produce the money. Now, the cost of labor, food is all in the profit percentage, but the business is what the business produces as far as what's called an EBITDA number. Earnings before interest, tax, distributions, and all that stuff, right? So it's an acronym. So if you have zero EBITDA, you can't pay your debt payments. If you have negative EBITDA, you might not be able to pay your payroll. If you have positive EBITDA, it may not be enough to have the owner take home any pay. So if you have a 10% profit margin on $1 million is $100,000, and your loan payments, these are not exaggerated numbers, are $10,000 a month that you have on a 5-year note, which is usually the payback schedule for a restaurant, about 5, 6, anywhere from 4 to 7 years. You're actually you're underwater $20,000 a year.
And you have to pay IRS taxes on your profit, right? So they don't care nothing about your loan payments. So that's another little.
Yeah, so keep in mind that restaurants, they have to produce a profit to pay for the investment and the cost of building out the restaurant. The restaurant doesn't come free. It would be nice. But there has to be some profit in there.
Well, we just blew through an hour. So we're ready to take questions from the audience. And we have 2 people will be walking around with some mics. You raise your hands and get. Hold on, we have one.
Hello? Mr. Stowell, I found your explanation of the distortionary effects of tipping really, really helpful. And I used to be in the restaurant industry, and why you had to go to a service charge. Do you believe that once a restaurant goes to a service charge and you want to continue to not have those distortionary effects, that the restaurant should have on its bill a place for a customer to put tips or not?
I think the question is basically, essentially, it's if there's a service charge, should you also have a tip line as well? Now, that's across the board a personal decision. Oftentimes, under the recommendation of your employees. You know, I mean, it's with all these changes. This is my thing. All of the changes that go on are hugely disruptive. So you're trying to do as little damage as possible, right? So having a minimum wage that changes as much as it does in Seattle is actually more challenging. That's one of the reasons why we went to the service charge to pay people an hourly rate. We want to get out of the annual raising of prices because minimum wage goes up, and we don't know how much until November. That's a hard thing to do. So we have experimented in both ways. We, as far as getting our employees, as far as going from 499 to 500 employees, so a small employer to a large employer last year, I'm pretty sure we're the only company that had to do it in the city of Seattle and King County. I think we're the only one that crossed that threshold last year. So it put us in a really tough spot that we had to tackle it solo. So the thing is a conversation about the debates of like, hey, what can we get our employees bought in on? You know, guarantee them this higher rate, which is really good for them on like banking, if they're buying a house or buying a car or whatever it is. It's really good for them to have a guaranteed rate that's high. That's higher than tips plus, right? And the banking system makes it looks more stable. So we think it was a win for the coworkers. However, some of them are like, you're trying to take our tips away from us. Like, no, we're giving you the minimum wage plus all of your tips you guys made. So, but there's oftentimes it's the employees who are the deliverers of the message of the policy changes to our customers. They're the ones that it's changing constantly every time minimum wage goes up. So personally, we've been doing some experimenting. We started off with service charge plus, if you want to leave a tip, go ahead, because everybody's been talking about how to get to the European model. That's what a lot of people say. Now, I think service charge is step one, and then eventually we'll get to all-in pricing. That would be nice. And so we do allow tips. We do have it. We started experimenting with not having the tip option, at least because we've gone to handheld terminals for people to pay at the table because it's faster and customers like it. But, you know, there's that pressure at the table to tip. So we've been experimenting with not having it. And actually the coworkers have been responsive to it because if Usually if there's a tip line and we had 1, 2, and 5% or something like that. There was always a conversation. So the coworkers have decided, in some regards, that they like not having the conversation. And if somebody wants to leave them money, they just take out a $5 bill or a $10 bill, leave it on the table. So that's the model we'd ideally like to get to. But I think the service charge, this is my opinion, is the first step, because it's hard to go from traditional pay plus tip to all the way to price increases unless everybody does it, because then all of a sudden it's all in on your pricing. You look really expensive when not everybody's doing it. But a service charge is a way to, I think, have that be a halfway point. And hopefully we'll get to all-in pricing at some point. I don't know if that answered it, but that was me rambling.
I think, Trevor, you've got one.
Hi, my name is Suresh. Thank you all so much for what you do. Food, I think, really brings people together. My wife and I have eaten at pretty much all of your restaurants. Sorry, except for Mr. Steinbrueck. I don't go north of Ship Canal. Chef Brown.
You probably read my Yelp review.
Yeah. I grew up in Baton Rouge, so Chef Brown, really heartfelt thanks for what you do. And everyone, you can take the number 2 bus straight to communion after this and get the collard greens with smoked turkey neck bones.
You plant him in the audience?
Not tonight.
Oh, not tonight. Sorry. Get the gumbo. So when I moved here, my wife and I moved here 25 years ago. My rent was about $225 a month for a bedroom in a shared house. And I don't think we're talking about really what is the core driver of your costs. You thrive on skilled local labor, and your employees have very, very high housing costs now, right? McDonald's is making stuff in factories in some other state with, mostly machines and underpaid labor. And so my question for you is, what were your monthly housing costs when you first got into this industry? And would you be able to afford to live in this city today in that same role without, say, access to family wealth?
I like to answer this question because I think it's an interesting space. When I started That Brown Girl Cooks in 1996, I was a single mother on food stamps in Section 8. I had Section 8. So it's an interesting space for me because my living does not is not reflected in the success of the restaurant. So I pay the same rent that I paid when I first opened the restaurant. I've been paying, I live in subsidized housing, to be honest with you. I live well on subsidized housing because I have a wonderful community and I live in a wonderful space that was really nurturing to me. But my value, the way that I am able to survive is outside of the restaurant. So it's like when I talk to my employees, they know that I'm talking to them. We're looking eye to eye, like what we're making. We're working on this together. And so this idea that I remember I worked for a restaurant and they were able to buy a house and it was like, everybody was just like, hip, hip, hooray. Because it was just like this magical thing because most of us wouldn't have been able to do that. So I don't know what everybody else's situation is. And I don't have a full, an in-house partner. I'm not married or anything like that. So, I think it's really grassroots. It's a lot of, benefits that I get from being an owner that I wouldn't have if I didn't own, being able to buy food in a different way or something like that. There's a way that we have to make this work because this is not we're not out here balling. Yeah.
I've got a microphone. I got a question. Hi, I'm Jack from Jack's Barbecue, and we have yay barbecue, and we have a full staff, full service, and everything. The waiters do make a lot. They make like 40, 50, 60 bucks an hour, and as the minimum wage goes up, our profits go down, prices go up, people are coming less, they're going out to eat less. What's wrong with every other state in the nation except for us in California, maybe New York, have a different wage for people who get that much tips? Why wouldn't it be $10 an hour for them and they only make 40 bucks an hour instead of 50 or more? That would save us, because every year we look at, as the rate goes up, we go, okay, when do we fire them all and go to counter service? We're not a fancy restaurant. We can't put 20% service charge on our bill. Our customers would not like that. Our customers love tipping. I like tipping. I know it's American, but they like, hey, you take care of me, I take care of you. They think like they're doing them a favor. It's cute. And we don't have to pay for it. And so we're saying, no, so let's go to a place where there's no tips, let the restaurant pay for it. Well, that's hurting us. It's hurting us big time. So we're not selling pizza. We can't do, we can do counter service, but it's just a different experience. In Texas, all the barbecue joints, you wait in line, you get a big red, you sit down. I don't like that. I call it grown-up barbecue. You sit down, somebody brings you a margarita, you order, your food shows up, you don't wait in line. So I don't want to get rid of that, but as the minimum wage goes up, that will disappear. All the restaurants in the middle range, high-end can charge 20%, low-end counter service. Us in the middle, we're going to fire all our waiters. So I don't want to do that. Why does Washington have to have the same rate for people who get tips?
I think Jack brings up a good point. I look at this stuff a lot. I will say the majority of states have a tip rate. Now, remember, my whole conversation here is not me advocating for any way or not. Our state has decided not to do it. Our state has decided not to do that. Most states do it. Even you said New York. New York has a tip credit. Their servers make $10 an hour last year. I think they're getting away with it. So, but they have historically had a tip credit. That's honestly, this is what I said before. That's why restaurants, if anybody hasn't been in New York lately, restaurants in Seattle are more expensive than restaurants in New York. And it's because we've chosen to have the highest minimum wage in the country and no tip credit. I don't have an opinion about that. We're for the changes going forward. So I guess I do have an opinion about it. But that's just this thing we've chosen as a state. So I think the question is that what does the new era of full service look like? Everybody has to get on board with change, because right now, currently, it's costing more and more and more and more and more, and it's going to keep on going up. Next year, I will tell you, next year is going to be the largest restaurant price increase we've ever seen in Seattle. And next year, everybody should go out to eat more than ever, because all of those restaurants are going to be hurting. So I think everybody has to go out more next year. But we have chosen this as a community. So now, if that changes, I'm not advocating that it will, and I don't think it will, but that's just kind of one of those things. Like, hey, that's just what it is to do business here. So if for me, I said, hey, I don't see this changing in any fashion, so I'm going to change my model and suck it up and deal with it and start moving in a direction that's more sustainable. That does require help on the customer's hands by saying, hey, all right, this is part of the reason why I'm glad the Seattle Times did this, and thank them for doing this. People have to get normalized for service charge. It's just something that has to do. And honesty, you shouldn't be in charge of a customer's income. Okay, two things I will say. One is, if you're in charge of the AT&T customer service rep and you got a tip, theoretically, if you like tips, you should want to be able to give a tip to the customer service rep. That person will make $0 an hour because you're on hold for 45 minutes, right? But my point is, you shouldn't be in charge of it, and you shouldn't be in charge of restaurants. We have servers that are covering new servers, helping train them, and maybe a table gets neglected for 10 minutes. It's 10 minutes. It's not the end of the world. But is it fair for that person to take out their frustration on that server? I don't think so.
That's our next subject. What kind of customer are you?
I know it's not what you...
And I want to lead that discussion, so I'm just putting it out there. If you guys want it, I'm here for it. I got a whole situation about it.
Right? We can develop a 3-part quiz.
Yes.
So at the end, it will be revealed what kind of customer you are.
Yes.
TBD. Who has a mic?
Do I have to stand up? I have to pee so bad. I'm Meg Van Hagen. I write about food for like 70 places. No one's talked about rent on your restaurant space yet. Is that maybe a reason it's expensive to go to restaurants? because I know a couple people who have their rent on their restaurant space doubled lately, and they had to raise the prices, and no one's talked about landlords or rent or anything like that. No?
Yeah, that's a huge part. I think the labor side of it maybe takes the cake on it, just because labor is so high. But rent is, there does need to be some rent control for commercial spaces, I believe. I also think that maybe here in the near future that may start happening, just because so many restaurants are going out of business because they can't stay in business. So growth is just not an option for them. And landlords are starting to realize that they need to fill these spaces that they've built that they're charging so much for and unable to fill spaces. So my hope is that maybe, Ethan, you got a better idea of this, but I believe that at some point that bubble will burst, and commercial spaces will hopefully go down a little bit.
My opinion is rents aren't actually as high, and I'll get to this as a point. So the East Side rents, Bellevue, and all on the East Side are much higher than Seattle. Now, I will tell you, and now you're getting into a very deep territory with tax code and stuff like that. Now, what I have seen explode on costs. So, and when you have a commercial restaurant space, right? You have rent, which is how much you pay, and then what's called triple nets. So your triple nets are your pro rata share of that building's property insurance, maintenance to the building, all of these things. Property taxes. I will tell you, the value of property taxes has gone up astronomically. All the property taxes, I haven't had our rents go up as much as I've had the triple nets go up. Triple nets have become a major problem, because it used to be, when I first started, your triple nets, which your property taxes and maintenance, all that stuff, was $3-4 a foot, and your rent was $25 to $30 a foot. I've seen that the rents are mostly $25 to $35 now, maybe $40, but the triple net costs associated with your space, which is the additional charge that people don't know about, is gone up to $12, $16, $20 per foot. So it's become a major factor. Okay, so I think, when we talk about, and I will say the majority of that is property insurance, and the largest piece of that is property taxes. So, that's where it's really gone up a lot. Well, rent's always an issue when you're not making any money. Yeah, it's definitely gone up a little bit, but it hasn't gone up nearly as fast as the triple nets have. I think when you're talking about the property taxes, I think so one of the things I'll say about and I'm sorry I'm hogging the mic here, but one of the things I've seen about our industry, we went over this 10 years ago with the minimum wage increase. There was a city council passing that, right? It was not voted on, and there was no plan at all to support small businesses as their costs of doing business escalated. There was no plan from the city. I'm not. In hindsight, there should have been some sort of plan to even out the costs, so prices to the customers don't go up. So, the things that I think we should be looking at on this to make things more affordable for our city. So we pay the major source of revenue that the city has is sales tax. The state, right, is our sales tax. We pay 10.25 right now. 10.35. Thank you. So that's a major source of revenue for the city of Seattle and the state of Washington, right? So my proposal would be, we also pay every sign permit, every patio permit, every B&O tax, all the stuff. Now, we're also in Idaho, where a lot of those taxes don't happen and those fees don't happen. Now, the way Idaho looks at it, I'm not saying they're ideal, but the way Idaho looks at it is that they're in partnership with a small business. They get a sales tax. Say, hey, we're not going to charge you a permit on a patio because we're in partnership in this business. So we would like you to have every incentive to build that patio, because we're going to make money on the revenue that you generate on that patio. So I think there's a lot of things we could do that would bring the cost of operating these restaurants down for people, so that we could bring the cost down to our customers. Because honestly, if we build a patio that's fancy and generates $1 million, state's getting $100,000 out of that. So I think we should be having a hard look at how our tax revenue impacts small businesses. Because we really want, everybody says they want small businesses to be successful, and if there's a sales tax generator, I mean, it's all the things. Like, let's make sure we want to have people go downtown. Let's talk about lowering the cost of parking because the city's going to make revenue on people going down there because we're a sales tax driven state. Let's talk about having, easier time and faster permits, because the faster that business gets open, the faster our partner, the state of Washington, will start generating revenue for our tax base. So there's a lot of things that can be done, because we're actually business partners. Any small business, any business with the state of Washington is a partner to the state, because we're generating revenue to them. So we should have an easier time doing it. I'm not saying strip away all safety regulations or anything like that. I'm just saying we got to start thinking of it as a partnership between the state and the business owners.
Okay. I think we have 2 more questions.
I wanted to ask about DoorDash, got mentioned just recently, how much it really costs a restaurant to have DoorDash available, and do you see that increasing, that percentage rising in a place like Seattle? We just had 2 teenage boys stay at our house last weekend, and they ordered Taco Bell at 10 o'clock at night, and it cost $50 for 2 little things, and it's like, what is going on? I don't know, but
I mean, we don't do a lot of DoorDash, but so I'd let somebody else who does more DoorDash answer it.
So are you asking like what it costs a restaurant to partner with DoorDash
I've heard
to have
DoorDash
the service?
I thought they made their money off of the delivery fee, but they take a percentage of the
It's
menu
it's
item too?
usually between 20 and 30%
Of the menu item.
of the menu item.
So you can't be crazy about that.
No, but it's extra revenue, and we need every slice of revenue we can get right now.
Okay.
So we need, because it's not a customer that's a delivery customer is not nearly as expensive to us as a customer sitting down, because they're there. I don't really love the takeout stuff, so we don't really focus on it very much, because the product's not the same. And I mean, every once in a while you get somebody calling up and being like, "Hey man, I got my pizza delivered through DoorDash and 3 slices of pizza are missing." You're like, well, it sounds like you got to talk to DoorDash about this issue.
But do you see that becoming
Ask that guy to give me a positive Yelp review while you're doing it.
But in a place like Seattle, is that the wave of the future? Is that there's going to be restaurants expected to provide DoorDash service?
I don't think any restaurants really love it. I don't think they love it. I think they're just chasing revenue right now. They're trying to make trying to make something to help offset the costs, right?
Yep. Okay, one last question.
Hi, I'm Jake. So I had a question. Would, say, government subsidies help small businesses, small restaurants offset the minimum wage? Like, I mean, I don't know. Maybe, is there an opportunity for subsidies to offset the price of minimum wage rising, I suppose?
I think I would need to have a little bit more like understanding, because I don't know what government subsidies would look like in the restaurant industry.
I don't know. I mean, I'm spitballing this idea, but like the state of Washington is the one raising the minimum wages, and then that's extra cost being put on you guys. So it's like, what if the government gave you guys money in the form of subsidies to offset that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, somebody wants to give me some money, I'll take it. And then there are things that they can do. You know what I was talking about, like, why do we have sales tax and a B&O tax? Why do we have all these application fees to open up a business that's going to generate revenue for the tax base? I think there's a lot of things like that they can do. I know everybody got a lot of PPP money in COVID, and that's not going to happen again. And it's certainly not going to happen on a federal level, because all the minimum wage stuff is on a state level. So, I mean, I think looking at what is the best way to generate tax revenue and the healthiest way, so it's not as much of a double dip, in my opinion, as Seattle does.
It's definitely a penalty. It feels like a penalty because there's just so many reporting agencies that we have to be accountable to just to maintain business. So it's like, again, I like what you were saying about looking at it as a partnership more than looking at it as a source of revenue, because it's just like, if we're not open, then what are you going to do? And there's not really very much support at all around like helping us understand how we're supposed to navigate all of this.
I think not just government, but our entire industry, but probably with the government or the community as whole. I mean, we need to be basically, with the increase of minimum wage and all that stuff, that we are here foremost than any other places in the country to really put emphasis on like taking care of people. And I think that's the big thing about the fact that, when people are coming from out of the states, they do not understand, they don't see. Like, it's just kind of like when you have on, like, let's say an organic apple and regular apple, conventional apple. The reason why we pay money for higher price for the organic apple is we understand how much work goes in and how much we value these things. There, we need basically a giant sticker on our windows, right? That says, we're here part of a community, we're here taking care of people, you are here supporting everyone who works in the industry, and then making sure that everyone who's living here can actually support themselves and live in the community. It's basically all of us to basically talk about those things and talk about our industry, how we are the foremost of it, and all those things, the values that we all care about, need to basically put in the front and then for people to talk about. So if the government can give us those big stickers to put on the window, that would help out.
Oh, okay, I lied. We have one final question.
Hi, my name's Sean. I'm a restaurant worker. I'm a wine cook. I've been working here in Seattle for almost 10 years. So I think a big reason this panel is even happening is because we're in a moment right now where the local restaurant lobby and city council have been trying to make sure workers like me don't get the raise we were promised 10 years ago. This was mentioned on the panel. And you also mentioned that City Hall hasn't really been doing much to actually help small businesses. To build off the last speaker's question, if City Hall wanted to help restaurants and workers, there are a lot of things I think they could do. Commercial rent control was already mentioned. They could institute municipal banking. They could pass laws to give small businesses preferential treatment in commercial leasing. They could expand late night transit, which would greatly help the bar and restaurant scene and the workers who work at those restaurants. And they could explore things like having a publicly run traveling benefits account for small business workers that would benefit people like me, that would take costs off of you. So I'm wondering, why do you think the restaurant lobby focuses instead on putting downward pressure on workers' wages rather than exploring these other options?
Great question. I think everybody on this panel is for the increase. And I think everybody in the restaurant industry wants everybody to make as much income as they can, because they recognize that even if you're doing great in the restaurant industry, it's still not a ton of money in a very expensive city like Seattle, right? I think I'm with you. I don't agree with trying to not increase the minimum wage. It's a plan we had, and I know people have said, it's come up so fast. We have had 10 years to plan for it. We have. I mean, I'm not saying that the restaurant industry is full of a bunch of economists who have been planning that long. I wouldn't go that far. But we have essentially had 10 years to plan for it. Let's hear from one of the other panelists. Sure. That's fine. So
I think it's a complicated question, though, and I think
we should go with the plan.
I think I will say that although he's speaking a lot, because of the amount of restaurants he has, he's got so much background information that can help you guys understand it more. I think like with us, it's such a vast difference between what he's talking about. And I would just say this, because I know that a lot of restaurateurs have gotten villainized for not wanting the minimum wage to change. And what I'll say to this is that the whole point of this conversation was to get more background information about the costs, because I don't even think, like, there's this idea like of having these open books and stuff like that to be able to help restaurant workers understand how much it costs for us to be able to do what we're doing. So I just feel like that's the part of the thing, is that although people might be like, are you serious about raising this damn minimum wage again? And it's not so that we can keep you from getting the money. It's like, look at how many businesses have gone under. Like, restaurants you would never think would have gone under right now. And I think that that's super important, that we're trying to figure out a way to stay alive. And I think that just because you have like some kind of comments, like, I know you got to protect yourself. You're in the public eye way more than I am. So I understand why you're like, I'm here for it. But there's got to be a space, a human space, when you're doing all of this work that we're doing, that you guys will never, ever see. Like someone like waking up in the middle of the night worried about what somebody said on a daggone review. It's like, and changing something immediately because you don't want that kickback and stuff like that. That amount of stress labor for smaller businesses like us trying to figure out how to make it work. It's like nobody's trying to keep people from making their money. We're just all trying to make some money. Like, we're all trying to, be able to continue to thrive and grow and open up new businesses and try to have more opportunities for folks. And so I just think, like, it just needs to be a little bit more compassion. And that's what I mean by when I say, like, what kind of customer are you? Because it's like, there's a space where there's just a human spot, again, because of people's attachment to things that have nothing to do with the food. Just like this, like, you got to be careful about saying family, right? It's like, oh, we're a family. No. Because then when we say we're a culinary family, then that means you get to take your history, your familial history, attach it onto this restaurant situation, and then you're reminding me about how your mom was. That ain't got nothing to do with me. So it's like, I just think that it's just a scary place to speak out and say things about what it is to, like, be able to have an honest conversation about what does this mean. Because like he said, there's going to be a space and time where when this change happens, so many people are going to end up closing or changing their whole service model because they're not going to be able to afford to keep going. So I don't know. It's always so hard to be in that space of, like, do you really think we're doing all this to not want people to make a livable wage? When you make a livable wage, you come to work. When you make a livable wage and you have insurance, when you get sick, you can take care of your family, and then you can come to work. What I want you to do is come to work, right? So I think that it's like, it's real crazy that we got to be scared about what we say because we don't want to be questioned around this thing. And I think that, again, if you understood how much people do to get the food to you the way you want it, I think your compassion level, your understanding would be a lot different.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, the panel. Now my editor is going to say a few words.
Thank you, Jackie, for stalling as I got up here. First of all, one more time, applause for the panel. Thank you for your time. As Jackie said, I'm Trevor Lensmeyer, features editor at the Seattle Times, and I am also a former longtime restaurant worker. So as a fan, as someone who respects your work, it was such a pleasure tonight. Thank you to our hosts, Town Hall, to our esteemed panel, to everybody who came out tonight. That is all of you. Thank you to all who read the Seattle Times and support our work. We invest our time and energy reporting on our local food scene because it's important, not just to us, but to our community. Because we like to tell folks where to eat, from Belltown to Bellevue, from Mount Lake Terrace to Mount Baker, Renton, and beyond. And also because the food industry, as you've heard here tonight, is about a lot more than just food. These are personal stories, culture stories, business stories, stories at the nexus of making it and not making it. We can't do the food journalism that folks love, nor hard-hitting investigative journalism, sports reporting, breaking news, politics, or anything of the like, without the support and subscriptions of readers in our community, with these handy QR codes here. I hope you'll visit seattletimes.com. I hope you'll subscribe. I hope you'll read more. And if you'd like, you can please feel free to grab me after this event. With that, please, one more time, applause for our panel. Otherwise, thank you. Have a lovely night. Thank you.
Thank you.